Go into how, what and how you carry out that mission, it's really important to understand why. Why is this important? Why should you follow the frog, like the video said? To give you a few statistics, to date, nearly half of the world's forests have been destroyed, and that's at a rate of about 32 million acres a year. With that, about 150 to 200 species go extinct every 24 hours. And deforestation causes about 20% of global greenhouse gas emissions. So this is clearly a huge global crisis. So we're trying to figure out what are the main causes of deforestation and how can we solve them. The Rainforest Alliance got together and they found these two main problems. And the first is that current land use practices create significant social and environmental problems. So with rising populations, there's an increasing demand for forest and agricultural products. And so communities that live in forest regions, often very impoverished communities living on less than $2 a day, they've resorted to illegal logging, over-harvesting, and converting their lands to agriculture. 70% of deforestation is caused by agricultural conversion. So these farmers are clearing the forests around them, they're adding excessive amounts of fertilizer, water, there's poor working conditions. So it's destroying wildlife habitats, it's causing a lot of erosion and polluting waterways. So it's really not sustainable. But while all of this is happening on the ground, the other problem that we see is that our supply chains are becoming so large and complex that the rest of the people up the supply chain, the buyers and the consumers like you and me, we don't really know what's going on with the source of production. So while you're drinking your cup of coffee in Proctor in the library, you might not have any idea where that coffee was grown, how it was grown, what is that person's life on the ground. And so if you don't really know what the social and environmental problems are involved in growing that, you might not have any reason to care. So in trying to kind of solve these problems, we as an organization recognize that there's no way to convince an impoverished community to stop cleaning their lands unless you provide them with a viable alternative. So our solution is to design a land use standard that delivers on what we consider the 3 pillars of sustainability. And that's environmental protection, social equity, and economic viability. So really our model is inspired by creating sustainable livelihoods for people, which then encourages them to manage their land sustainably and protect biodiversity. So we work throughout the entire supply chain. On the ground, we provide training and technical assistance to farmers, and then moving up, we certify them against a couple different standards. We work in agriculture, forestry, and tourism. And within each of those, we have created a set of standards with which we audit farms against. We then help connect those certified farms with businesses that are interested in sourcing sustainably. And then even further up the supply chain, we help connect those businesses. We create consumer awareness around them. So we help, we use our little green frog to help you as a consumer easily identify where these businesses are sourcing their products from. So it's a very holistic perspective to conservation and business, and we really believe that there is a way for these two things to coexist with this model. And what's important to remember here is that in our experience, each of these pieces really needs to be working with each other, engaging with each other, and the degree to which they're isolated really undermines sustainability of the whole system. So that's what I've got, Richard.
So what we've done is we've established a whole series of relationships with organizations around the world. These are examples of them. The number of organizations that we've actually done this with exceeds 100, and it cuts across agriculture, forestry, tourism, and climate change, and actually even education. So lots of different organizations we work with. These are companies where initially it might have been driven by the CEO making a decision, or it might have been other staff that pushed the CEO. It might have been the shareholders. In each situation, it's a little bit different. Probably the company that you hear most about in terms of corporate leadership on a lot of these issues today is Middlebury, which is driven by a great guy by the name of Paul Pullman. But there are examples in all sorts of businesses. Fortunately, there are lots of Paul Pullmans out there. He wouldn't like me to say that, but I'll say it. There are a lot of them out there that may not be quite as visible or with the company as large as they're out there. Next slide. So SAN means Sustainable Agriculture Network. We created a network, and with that network of nonprofit organizations, we created a standard. I'm not going to read all of this, but I'm going to give you a flavor. So these are the 10 areas. Let's assume that you are a really good coffee farmer. You think you know what you're doing. You think you're environmentally and socially sensitive. You treat your workers well, and you want to get recognition for that. And you may even have a company like, say Caribou Coffee or other coffee companies that want to buy good stuff. How do you prove to them that you're doing it right? We set up a system, now it's over 20 years old, in which these 10 principles are basically evaluated, audited at the farm level to see whether or not you're doing good management. For each of those pieces of the puzzle, there are a whole series of indicators or audit checkpoints. It's a detailed process. Has anyone been exposed to an audit process related to Rainforest Alliance?
No.
But audits, yes.
Yeah.
What kind of audit was it?
Here at the college with the Real Food Challenge.
There you go.
With the dining purchases.
So what you know is that when we go out and do audits, and I love auditing more than any other single thing I do. It might be a little sick, but it's true. So when you do audits, there's a kind of a triangle of the way we go about it, which is we get evidence from 3 different places. We get it from the practices we see on the ground, which is at the top of the pyramid, or the top of the triangle. We talk to people, and we talk to people not just in the companies, but outside of the companies. And then we review a lot of documents. We look to see that whatever's written in a policy is actually translated into the field. So it's not enough just to have the policy. It's not enough to just talk it. You got to walk it. Okay, so you got to look at all 3 of those pieces. Next slide. So, fast forward, you've gone through the audit. What tends to happen through that process? Some farms we go to, and frankly speaking, they're in pretty good shape. The vast majority, for example, Sustainable Ag Network is working with over 1 million farms around the world. They produce everything from cocoa to vanilla to spices. Even now we have a sustainable ranching standard for beef. And so what you will see on an uncertified farm, and we have created a unit, which is an evaluation research unit, which is doing impact research to see whether in fact we're achieving this stuff. So it's not enough for us to just tell you we're doing it. We want to be able to document that we're doing it. So maybe we'll see forests clear cut for planting crops. We might see child labor or bonded labor, which is a dynamic in a number of different countries. You've probably been exposed to that in your work. Polluted streams and waterway. I'm a forest hydrologist, watershed specialist. That's kind of right in my bailiwick. On a certified farm, you'll see a different story. You won't see, in most cases, perfection. Let's be clear about that. You'll see people that have a base level of performance, which means, in essence, they're not injuring. But what we want to do is we want to push them that higher level. So we've had some operations that we certified back in 1993 in forestry. They're still with us today. And I can tell you that their operations today look quite different than they did way back then. Next slide. So here are just a couple of vignettes, kind of experiences. We've worked with Chiquita now for 20 years. They reduce their costs. They go into this. Each of these companies doesn't just go into it because they want to feel good. They got to be business reasons driving it. First, the feel-good stuff kind of works. But then after a while, if you're not a better business because of your engagement in it, you're going to say, why should I pay for these annual audits? I got to have something that validates why I'm making these investments. So in their case, they reduced their cost by 12% and they actually increased the productivity per hectare per year for bananas by 27%. Small cocoa and coffee farms. Most coffee and cocoa is grown by smallholders, what we call small landowners here in the United States. It's grown by those types of operations. Cocoa, for example, 2 of the big countries for cocoa production are Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, and Ghana. Millions of small farmers. And one of the things we do in the standard is we help them not just take care of the uglies, environmental pollution or labor standards, but actually help them, give them guidance on how they can grow a better coffee bean or a better cocoa product. Cocoa nut? Cocoa pod, there you go, it's a pod. I've worked with cocoa for a long time, I never even thought of it. Lipton's and McDonald's, what they did was at the market end, how did it help them as a business? The guy who just took over McDonald's was the leader for McDonald's UK, which is associated with Rainforest Alliance for coffee. He was part of the team that made that decision. So we are somewhat optimistic. We'll see what happens. The proof is in the pudding. We'll see what happens with McDonald's. You'll gather from the brands and the companies that we're working with that we're, on one level, we're not too picky who we work with, other than what is represented in the commitments and the standards. That's what matters to us. So we're pretty much not an organization that says never. Would we never work with Walmart? No, we won't say that. They buy into what we're working on, we'll work with them. And that's at times, and I've had weekly conversations, it's almost daily, with NGOs, environmental organizations that may be far left. But I'm talking to them all the time, and a lot of times they're working their way, they're doing their thing, and we're doing our thing, and we communicate with each other. We don't necessarily, quote unquote, coordinate, but we communicate. And that's because there are lots of different ways to get sustainability done. And there are lots of different players. And I actually feel campaigners, those on the left or those on the right, all play a valuable role. And the question is how we channel that positively. Let's go to the next one. There are just some products. You've seen, somebody's seen, who has not seen a product with a frog in it? That's probably an awkward question, right? Have you all seen something with a frog in it? Okay, bye. There's some more stuff. Okay, so great. So one of the things that we are trying to do is get a better sense of our impacts. So we keep track of a series of metrics. All businesses, good businesses do this. Good organizations do this. We put this in acres because it's here in the United States where we talk acres. And one of the things we're looking at is trying to move each of these crops to where our goal in the near term is to try to get them to 20%. Our hypothesis is if we can get to 20% of global market, we're at a tipping point. We're becoming mainstream. We're able to cause change at a broader level. Now that's a hypothesis. You know, there are other people who say, nah, you gotta be up about 50%. No. We already think even at these percentages, we're changing those industries, but we really think we can have mainstream impact when we get beyond 20. Next slide. So this is in forestry. When I started working with the Alliance, after about 17 years of field experience, doing other things with other organizations, I came to the Alliance because it was 1987 or so. I had been working in the field. I ran a project in Costa Rica from 87 to 92. And I've been working on international development projects, something Save the Children has done, a lot of us have been involved with. And I was just astounded at how the lack of accountability with projects. It was driving me crazy. U.S. government, many governments put tons and tons of money into all sorts of projects, but the long-term accountability just wasn't very good from my perspective. Rainforest Alliance introduced me to the concept of certification, which basically said, if you want the recognition, you got to prove it. And that rang with me. That made sense to me. It was just logical to me. So that's why I engaged with Rainforest Alliance. Next slide. This is climate change. Probably, I would say right now it's the issue of our time. We have had a climate program now for about 7 years. I helped design it. Jeff Hayward, who used to be in our Vermont office, and Tracy knows, is the director of our climate program, based in Washington, D.C. We go to those big meetings, the conference of the parties, we're participants in those. But what people look for from us is what is happening at the field. They're looking for the boots on the ground input. That's what Rainforest Alliance is known for. What's going on out in the woods? What's going on out on the farms? Next slide. All right, now, I should have put these lettering in white so you can see it better.
So this is a conversation I wanted to have a little bit. Is anyone familiar with something called the New York Declaration? Okay, last year, about, I'm going to say 27 countries, 50 companies, and about 30 or 40 NGOs signed a declaration to stop deforestation. Made a big deal about it. Announced their commitments to stopping deforestation. Now, on the one side, Rainforest Alliance was pretty psyched about that. On the other side, what we saw was people saying, well, certification, that other stuff, it's a little too, it's now been around for a while, and we don't think it's the solution. And we're worried. So we got worried that they were taking and basically saying, you know what, the issue is deforestation, it's not sustainability. So if we can stop deforestation, we're taking care of the problem, right? That was the concept behind the declaration. So what we've been engaged in over the last, and this is going on right now, literally, we are in the midst of a policy discussion. And one of the questions I have for you in your conversations here, John, with the students, with the community here, we find that the concept of sustainability is what we think we should continue to focus on because it embeds a whole variety of values and other things. But what we find today is that deforestation is what rings with them. Rings with them, consumers. It rings with a lot of the target audiences. And they say, you need to focus just on deforestation. Forget that other sustainability stuff. What's your reaction? What do people think of that? Go for it.
In terms of what rings with consumers, I could see why just the word sustainability doesn't ring anymore because it's like all natural. It's just become so pervasive, it doesn't mean anything anymore. But I think the word is different than the concept. And so you could use deforestation free as a label, but it's really sustainability that you're talking about. So I think those are kind of two separate issues.
Okay. I'll come back to deforestation. Somebody else had their hand up. No? Did I dream that? Or another shot? Who else? Anybody else got a comment on it? So what we're having a conversation about is that term actually deforestation free? Because there are other organizations that are talking about zero deforestation or net zero deforestation or other kind of, when I say net, you're shaking your hand. Why don't you like your head? What do you think?
Net zero deforestation makes no sense. So like, I don't really know that much about sustainability, but like
Right.
hearing net zero, like I don't.
Yeah, which kind of implies I can do a bunch of bad, but if I do something good,
As long as it evens out.
as long as it evens out, I'm better off than where we are. What other term besides sustainability rings with you? When now in college, in discussions that you're having, what are the terms that you're talking about? Is sustainability still really center to what you're talking about?
Lately, resilience has become a new buzzword.
Uh-huh. Any others? Oh,
Carbon neutrality.
carbon neutrality. Throw them out. I want to hear more terms because I'm taking pulse here. I'm trying to figure out what's going on out there, outside of the world I live in. What else? Sorry?
Mitigation.
Mitigation. What else? Any other terms?
Restoration.
Restoration, big one. Okay, so when we look at, you'll see pieces of some of those things in here. We're looking at things like restoration. We're looking at climate and crop resilience. One of the things, there's been great work done on this, by the way, by the Forest Service up here in the Northeast on how climate is changing, what's going on out here in the landscape. And a lot of the work that was done a few years ago actually looks like it's pretty dead on in what it said is going to happen, and it's actually happening. So we're looking at crop resilience. Poor farmers living in a particular location, and all of a sudden the climate changes on them. Where does it push them further up the hills to get more water, or to get to better soils? What does it do? What does it do to change the dynamics of where they're working and how they're working? So all the terms we talked about. Neutrality kind of fits into the bailiwick of this net thing, and so people are, there's a lot of mixed emotions. And in Europe, the concept of net anything, people just go bonkers on. The environmental community, the NGO community just doesn't like that concept. much at all. So when we talk about, you know, climate change and mitigation, they're like, they get the shutters, they get a little bit shaky. Let's go to that next slide. So I want to make sure we left a lot of time to just talk about some stuff. And so there's a couple take-home messages that I wrote, that I put on the table here. Carly, you get to say something right after this. I'm going to pass it over to you. With any other conclusions. For entrepreneurs, unequivocally where we are and what we see is that social and environmental safeguards and something called traceability, which means knowing where stuff comes from, are here to stay. Either as a proactive business proposition or risk management. The people at Unilever that deal with a lot of these products just don't want to get tattooed with the fact that they did something negative somewhere. There are other companies who are totally on board, not because they're worried about risk, but because they want to emphasize the positive aspects of their product right from the get-go. And they feel from a design point of view, they designed in sustainability right from the start. Chain of custody, I can remember going into, and traceability, I used to go into industry forums, and Tracy might remember these, where people would laugh and say, this is impossible, you will never do that. Try to go to a Walmart or many of these other buyers today and say, you don't know where the stuff comes from. They're not liking it. They want to know where the stuff came from. Now, they may not want to know where everything came from, but it's increasingly unacceptable to go to the consuming businesses and say you don't know where the stuff came from. It's just kind of normal operating procedure now to expect traceability. Sometimes they're unrealistic on that, but the point is they want it. They want to see it. For environmental studies students, the role I'll play here is to advocate for boots on the ground experience. Get out, work in a farm, work in a forest, get on the ground, understand these production systems in agriculture and forestry. Get that experience, because once you do it, it stays with you forever. You'll never forget it. Maybe a bunch of you already have it, and that's great, but make sure you get it if you can. You're at a great school, so take advantage of the opportunities here to do that. For students in general, has anyone seen this Harvard Business Review article on T-type people? Somebody's nodding their head. So, for a long time in Rainforest Alliance, I was kind of what do you call it, an I type person. I was really focused on forestry. And I really wasn't encouraged much to be broader than that. I think that's probably where I was back in the early 2000s, you know? Now I'm absolutely required to be a T-type person, which means I don't lose my technical specialization in a particular thing, but I have a better understanding of what's going on across all our programs, across all the players in our programs and what they're doing, and I have to figure out how can I complement what Carly does. Because I'm expecting Carly to develop, she's a young professional, she'll develop a T-type experience, right? She'll deepen in something, but you'll also need to understand across the various things that we do, better understanding how all the puzzle fits together, working with teams of people. And then lastly, that was my foreign language question. For the people that Rainforest Alliance hires, if you want to get a job in Vermont or anywhere else with Rainforest Alliance, if you don't have a second language, it's not that you're not a good person, but you're just going to have you're going to be up against people who do have that. And not every position requires it, but if you got it, it puts you in a better position. What would you add? Anything else at the end here?
Yeah, I guess for me it's just really exciting to be back here kind of almost a year after graduating. I was an environmental studies major, and I felt like I was constantly learning about kind of just problems. Like, this is what's wrong with the world, there's so many environmental problems, so many social problems, and it really brought me down. And so it's exciting for me to be working for the Rainforest Alliance, where we're actually solving those problems. This is a solution to it. And so I feel like I'm very lucky that I was able to find an organization that I very much believed in so quickly after graduating. And my position there is I get to work in the executive office on special projects. So that means I'm working on sort of new initiatives that come out of the executive office, and I get to research and develop these and kind of create teams across various programs. So it's really cool because I'm interacting with people like Richard who have so much more experience and expertise than me, and they're so much smarter than I am. It's just really, it's a really great place to be, and I'm very fortunate to have gotten there so quickly. Yeah.
I don't think I'm smart. This is so
So, anyone have any questions?
So why were bananas the lowest certifiable group of that cluster that you showed?
Been interesting with bananas. You know a little bit about bananas, other than eating them?
Not much.
Okay, so what's interesting about the banana industry is the European market dynamics and the North American market dynamics are quite different. There are actually laws in the EU which orient, and depending on the country in Europe, towards purchasing of bananas from particular countries. So what you'll find is that even though you've got a big producer like Chiquita, a lot of countries or buyers will purposefully not buy from the bigger companies. So that's one of the interesting challenges with it. Now that's changing a little bit now. Dole has just come on board. They're another major producer of bananas. And then you have all these cooperatives and smaller operations which are beginning to get on board. So I think we're going to see a sea change there. I think it's going to take a while to play out still. The other interesting thing was that Chiquita, when they originally engaged, they used the label, the frog, in Europe. They didn't use it here. And that was true for at least 10, 15 years. Now you go Chiquita and you'll see that Rainforest Alliance frog, not all the time, but most of the time, on product in the stores. So from our perspective, that was an opportunity lost, but one of the things we say to the companies, you don't have to put the label on if you don't want it. It's your choice. And in some cases, they put the label on and they don't have a proactive marketing strategy. They just, oh, I'm just going to slap it up there and that'll make it sell. Doesn't tend to work that way. You got to have a marketing strategy. You got to know what you're doing to take advantage of that thing that you're doing to make people sell. We have some banana specialists on the team, so they probably give you a smarter answer. But that's, again, kind of part of my take on what's wrong. Yeah.
Could you just talk a bit about, within the structure of the Rainforest Alliance, it seems like you're sort of forming these relationships with big companies on a big scale, but then you also have people who are out there, boots on the ground, working with local farmers. And so could you just talk about a bit how the policy is translated from that boardroom when you make an agreement with a corporation to the guy who's actually going to the farm in Nicaragua or somewhere else, and is trying to change the practices of a particular farm, but also maybe what those people on the ground see as the difficulties and how that gets communicated up to people in offices here in the U.S.
What's interesting is that, some companies are really good at cascading information or down or going back up. A lot of companies aren't. So the people at the HQ level may not actually know what the production difficulties or other pieces of the problem are down on the ground at the producer level. So if I understood your question right, it's kind of like how do we work that balance?
Yeah, both directions.
Both directions. So one of the things we do, and Tanzi, my boss, just did this with the head of Avery. Ever heard of Avery Dennison? They do all the labels that you put on folders and all those things. They're the world's largest. They have like 60% world's market share of the label market. It's unbelievable. Well, Avery Dennison decided they're worried about their supply chain, and we're doing some things to help them with their supply chain. But they actually also wanted to be known as a company that was just had a good feel to them. So they've actually invested in a philanthropic project in Honduras, and now this is the second year where Tanzi's taken the CEO out to the field. He hadn't done that before. To see what's going on down on the ground in farms and forests in Honduras. So part of what we do, it's interesting because it might be that their own staff, when they ask that CEO or those senior staff to go, they're like, I got other things I gotta focus on. But when senior staff from our organization ask them to go, they're kind of like, oh geez, I guess we better go. So we work it that way. Meriwether Hardy, who is someone that Carly has worked with, we got another thing going on right now where she's working with technology on how to communicate between producers. But we're also going to use that technology, and so they're literally using smartphones and iPads on different production methods, how they can improve producing coffee. I think it's been focused mostly on cocoa and coffee.
Coffee in Guatemala.
Coffee in Guatemala. And so they're just really psyched. There's actually a cute video that she had that she showed at our manager's retreat on one lady who was just totally pumped because she'd never had the opportunity to share experiences between producers, between farmers, on how to improve their production. And she was actually able to see, using a smartphone and an iPad, what those production changes were. So now what we're able to do is not only share between producers, kind of like, you know, in some places they call South-South information exchange or things like that, but we can take that same information and shoot it up. So now the people that are at the HQ can see what's going on at the field level. So we're getting into some technology stuff, which we don't see as a substitute, we see as an additive to what we're doing, so that people can better understand the production changes that are happening at the field level. And we think the sky is the limit for doing that kind of stuff. Because many of the places we work in, they all have mobile phones already. They're already using them in many of the countries. So how can we take that kind of technology? The other thing is when we work with coffee and cocoa farmers, we work with organizations. So we place a lot of emphasis on the organizational part of it, and you probably did a fair amount of this work at SAVE as well, which is we can work with individual farmers, but our ripple impact happens through organizations. So if we can work with one organization that works with 30,000 farmers, imagine you're training some people at the central level that then ripple that stuff out. So that's the other way to do it, is to get across and out there working between all the different producers. And we're encouraging more and more interchange between all these producers. I'll give another example, which is actually internal to us, which is historically, we were at one point, who's heard of matrix management? I would have guessed. John, you haven't heard of this?
No.
Dude. Okay, so here's the idea. You're in an organization, you're in different departments. It is quite common for you to be in silos, right? To not communicate amongst yourselves the way that you should. And frankly, if you do that, you can actually enhance your impact in both what you're already doing, plus the ways in which you work. So for example, I've now got technical foresters working on teams with a marketing person, a communications person, an education person, and an IT person. 10 years ago, I can tell you that didn't happen. Pieces of it happened, but it wasn't a consistent approach to things. So what we're now doing, we've reorganized some things in which we basically, Rainforest Alliance is a matrix management organization. So if you're not aware of it, you're going to get into working in the private sector particularly, but even the NGO sector, I suggest you dig a little bit and start looking at that from a management point of view. Because we're now, this is the first year where I've seen, we just had a manager's retreat where 100 of our staff got together. And it's the first year where I saw that it was taking hold, and it wasn't some ethereal, superficial conversation. We were doing it. And I had staff saying, I'm not going to have that meeting with you, Richard, unless the communications person's there as well. Because it doesn't make sense. We got to have them in organically from the get-go. Now, my guess is you do things here at the university which are kind of matrixy, and you may not call them that. But we accept it, and matrix management isn't the panacea, it's a challenge, but it really is something that's very interesting to look at. How you change the interplay, because when we do matrix, it allows us to talk with all the different parties. There's the table. I was just at Kimberly-Clark, big tissue company, and lots of consumer products on Tuesday. And I had in the room a VP of chemistry, a VP of marketing, one person was just a forester. And I asked them how much is matrix management, and that is, they live it and breathe it, they have to do it, and it's become a new way of managing the organization. A lot of NGOs, I would say, it still represents something relatively new for them. But we're doing it, and we're now finally really seeing the benefits after probably 3 to 4 years of talking about it. Now, I think you had your hand up, and then I'll go to John.
Okay, I had a question about the value of the frog to consumers and what kind of research you all have done on which demographic, looks for the frog, chooses the frog. Is there a premium on the products that's, I'm just sort of a little bit curious about the consumer side of the seal.
That's great.
What you've all learned about it.
And Carly, these aren't just questions for me. So
Yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah, both of
Okay.
you, sure.
In a minute, both of them.
Yeah.
So 2 perspectives, and some of this goes back to when Tracy was working with us, that we were always skeptical of the premium thing. We basically said, if you get certified, you get the frog, that doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get a higher price or sell more product. If you don't have a strategy behind that, you might get lucky. And people have gotten lucky, but by and large, we don't think that's the way it should be. We think that when we organize a relationship with an organization, they need to develop a strategy that explicitly takes advantage of that opportunity. And if they do that, we think their chances of being successful jump up like that. Now, in terms of actual practice, so when you will hear us in a public forum, we will never say, get certified so that you can get a premium. We just, it's too weird. You don't know if it's actually going to happen. That said, we know there are people getting premiums. Why? They're good business people, to be perfectly honest. We do think that the value of the frog down McDonald's, and others have done analyses, they did well with Rainforest Alliance certified coffee in the UK market when they started doing it. During the Olympics, there was one of the tube stops where it was, what's the chocolate company? Galaxy
Cadbury.
Chocolate. And you went into one of the tube stops, and it was Galaxy Rainforest Alliance everywhere on all the walls in this tube stop. I think it was King's Cross. And they perceived a knockout. Now, one of the interesting things is you'll ask a company, did you get a premium or did you get greater market share? They're pretty careful in answering that because they don't want to create too many expectations, and they're competitive beasts. So if they got a bump up of 20% versus 3% versus, we've never had it be a situation where if I put the frog on there and my business went down. We haven't seen that happen. But I do think that what we're seeing is that there is it's about market share or maintaining or enhancing market share would be, but we were talking about that back in the early 2000s.
That's why people got into it.
Right.
The only reason was sort of make it look good and a premium.
Yeah. And I think one of the things we're running into today is a lot of those producers that originally went into it because they thought they would get a premium, even if we cautioned them on it, they still wanted that premium. They were disappointed by that in many cases. And that created a kind of a negative dynamic with some of them.
Yeah, I would say from a consumer standpoint, there's an increasing number of certifications that are out there. There's like Rainforest Alliance, Fair Trade, organic, non-GMO, and it's confusing, I think, that there's so many of those. But for us, I think having all of those kind of continues to raise the bar for us and continue improving our standard.
And it's a vehicle for visibility for us and the values that we're supporting. So even if it doesn't mean a whole ton of a certified product, the values are still getting out there. So even if we're not the dominant part of a particular commodity and et cetera, that's okay. Let's not worry about that. It used to be tooth and nails fighting with fair trade, going back 15 years or so ago. Today, we don't spend any time on that, at least as far as I'm aware. It's all about, hey, there are some values we share with fair trade, some values are different, but you know what? Let's get that boat floating higher. All of those are aspects of sustainability. So Rainforest Alliance, notwithstanding the concerns that I have about deforestation, supplanting the sustainability message, Rainforest Alliance is full on with sustainability. We aren't changing, we're moving. We got to find out better ways of articulating it and clarifying it. John, and then you, and then you, and then you.
So I'll try to be quick, and it's a question for Carly. So as I think about what Middlebury does, this T-type person is sort of what the liberal arts is, if you think about it, right? You have a major, but then you learn across fields and so forth. And then this wonderful matrix approach might capture what some of the things we're trying to do, whether it's in mid-core or the school of the environment, working in teams. If 401 works, it's supposed to be that way too, right? Bringing people with different concentrations. So maybe that's going at least okay and spreading. But what you're sharing with us in the context of a talk sponsored by the Center for Social Entrepreneurship is actually something that Charlie has really emphasized, which is entrepreneurship. You all are innovators. You're innovators, and you've been around for a long time. So the narrative around you is not, one we wouldn't share with our students around you is, go start something new. It would be, go to Rainforest Alliance and innovate, the way maybe social entrepreneurs do. So Carly, with all that, you know our center pretty well, and we're kind of feeling like we're now doing CSE 2.0, so we want to start some new things. And so what should we do to prepare students to think about and enter innovative companies or NGOs where they can be entrepreneurs? What's the training that's lacking at Middlebury to help you to do that?
I mean, honestly, I think mid-core helped me so much, and I really appreciate that, Jessica. I think, I don't know, I feel like something that I would, tell other students is don't be confined by your job description, just, you have the ability to ask for more, and I would always say do that. Always take on more things. Ask for, I don't know, just try to keep pushing boundaries, I guess, within your job. But here, I felt like I was honestly very prepared for this job. There's a lot that I don't know, but I've learned to reach out to people within the organization and just ask them questions about what is it that you want to do on a day-to-day basis. How did you get here? And I think just being kind of aggressive in that is helpful once we're there. Yeah, but I feel like Middlebury prepared me very well for this.
That's great.
So my question is actually related to your answer. Knowing that you sat in the speaker series regularly last year, you did mid-core last January, and I would love if you could elaborate on some of the resources you took advantage of while you were here and how you kind of built a foundation. Just for the current students that are sitting in the room, if they're not aware of some of the resources that you found while you were here.
Yeah. So I interned at the center, and that, for me, was really kind of the starting point of where I got interested in this space. So that was probably my biggest resource. I think for me, what has been most helpful throughout my time here and kind of the internships that I've had is really finding mentors. Heather was a great mentor to me. At 1% from the Planet, I had a great mentor there. And so I think wherever, if it's in your classes, just making connections with professors or your internships, just finding someone who cares about you and takes an interest in you is something that has really, really helped me on my path. And that's definitely something that I would take advantage of while you're here.
And just a philosophical piece, because I'm the senior part of my professional experience. And we use the word mentoring, we talk about that. And I'm okay with it, but it kind of implies, in a way, kind of like I know something that they don't, and I'm a little bit leery of that. So I look upon mentoring as a senior peer. And that's the kind of relationship it should be about, because Carly's going to bring some stuff and mindset and things to the table that I haven't even thought about. But vice versa, I can do the same. The other thing to hit your question a little bit, John, just in my experience, I went to Antioch grad school. One of the things I liked about it was that I wasn't just technical forest hydrology. I did business and leadership stuff and got exposed to that, which just opened the mind in ways. And I would Not that you have to do X percent of your curriculum focused on that, but doing those kinds of things really, to me, were really important because I get too many staff that are scientists who are very focused. They've got the bottom part of the T, but they don't have the top part of the T. And they come in and they don't have that management, leadership, business experience that, and you'd think, well, it's a nonprofit, how much of that do I need? Well, you know, anybody who's been involved in managing a nonprofit knows there's a lot of business stuff there that you've got to manage and handle. So, who's next? We'll go with you and then you.
I just have a question. In terms of your customers or your partners, how do you go about acquiring new ones? Do you reach out to the McDonald's and the Unilevers, or do they come to you?
It's a mix. In some cases, they come to us because they have problems. In other cases, we're pointedly, when I started this job, and I think it was probably part of my mantra when Tracy was working with us, was I wanted us as an organization to be associated with leadership organizations, others. So I would find out who are the best forest products companies that were out there. And I'd say, let's talk with me. Maybe it won't be a relationship right away, but let's build towards it. And there are some companies that I literally, I don't know if you could call it the mating game or whatever you want to call it. It took 10 years of relationship building before something actually happened. But no, we do both the proactive and the reactive sometimes. The reactive is the hardest part because sometimes you got to say no. Because when they come to work with us, there's a value proposition that we offer. And that it's not just that we offer, but it's part of us. And if the buy-in, we're not, you know, we don't dictate to people. But we do say, this is what we're about. And if the matching isn't right, it's a disservice for us to imply otherwise. So maybe the time isn't right. We've been working with a company I was talking to Carly about it on the way down here, Asia Pulp and Paper. All you got to do is Google Asia Pulp and Paper, and you'll find a nest of interesting stuff. Some not so good. And we had a relationship with them. They came to us in about 2004. We worked with them for 3 years, and we severed the relationship because it wasn't working like it was supposed to. They came back to us in 2013. They changed things. They thought they had fixed things, and they said, we would like Rainforest Alliance to tell us whether, in fact, we've really changed or not. And we just did a big public report on it, etc. But they knew going into it, and one of the things we said was, if we're going to do this relationship, it has to be serious, and that means CEO to CEO, we agree. There has to be a conversation. And we literally put that on the table, so they came to New York and met with us at the senior leadership level, because APP's done, it's a family that also owns most of the shares from the Wijaya family. We asked the Wijayas to come and meet with us, to sit down, to make sure they were serious about it. So you may have commitment at other staff levels, but the leadership isn't there. And if there's one thing I've learned about companies, and I think it's probably true for nonprofits as well, if the leadership isn't buying in to what you're trying to do, at some point it's going to go kerflooey. At some point it's going to have problems. So I think you were next, yeah.
So you've talked a lot about how Rainforest Alliance gets together with big corporations and they're sort of targeting the consumer as the mode of quote-unquote sustainability or whatever you want to call it. I'm curious about how do you manage if someone were to say to you, you're going into these other countries, you're telling them what's best for them, you're sort of working top down. How do you make sure that you're including the farmers and you're talking to them about what they want? It's not what Unilever wants. And how do you make sure that they trust you and that certifying their farms is actually good for them? It's not just good for us purchasing.
That's great. That's great. And philosophically, that's an enormous question and challenge I had when I joined the organization. I had 3 things that I asked of the organization. One was I was going to live in Vermont. I wasn't going to live in New York City. Number 2, I needed a month of vacation every year to go to Minnesota. And number 3 was we had to work, at that point they were only certifying tropical forests. And I said, I can't do that. I can't sit in Vermont and be judge on jury on what's going on in Honduras. It just doesn't work. So by the time Tracy came on and others, we had made, after a year, we'd made that change. And I literally made it a requirement for my job was that we were going to be global in scope, The other thing was we were going to hire local people, and we've been able to do that from the get-go. So in most cases, actually, Unilever came to us because of our capacity and experience in the field. That's why they came to us originally, because we knew about cocoa farming and coffee. Excuse me, I think coffee was the first commodity we worked with them on. And it was because we were seen as understanding what goes on at the field level. And by the way, those were, you know, field people that were based out in the field. They lived in Costa Rica, or they lived in some of these places. The way we see this kind of dynamic of you're in X location and the producer's in Y location is that it's about a written standard. That standard is written, it's a multi-stakeholder driven standard, so it isn't just written by a bunch of Americans sitting in New York. And that's the kind of way that we've approached it. So when we developed the Sustainable Ag Network, it was NGOs that helped us develop the standard from, I think it was Costa Rica, Brazil, Guatemala, Colombia, and El Salvador. So they jointly developed the standard. So it wasn't seen as, oh, this is a North American standard. No, it was a global standard for sustainable agriculture. At that time, it was heavily influenced by Latin America, unequivocally. But our first crops that we focused on were bananas and coffee, which were heavily, those were big things in Latin America in particular. Coffee market, by the way, has changed. Tea is the same way. These are products that originally were there were clusters of where they were important, and that's just totally changed. Coffee is incredible how it's evolved. Have you had Carrie Green Mountain here to talk at all? You know, how that business has evolved from a farm and coffee farm level over the years. It's just really, I think it's actually kind of dramatic. So we haven't, I think we still have challenges to keep on that philosophy. We have to keep focused on it and not forget it. But it's not something I have to worry about too much because it's just something that's kind of part of us. It's part of our gene pool, I guess you could say. And our staff. I mean, I'd be curious how many Americans we actually have on staff. I'm going to guess it's about a quarter of our staff. Something like that. I'm worried about time, right?
Yeah, it's after 1:30 now, and I know people have classes to get to and places to go, so
Yeah.
I think we're going to end there, but Richard and Carly are around if you have other questions. Thank you for coming, and thank you for